guys, it's Lisa from the blog farmhouseonboone.com, and today I'm finally going to share a much requested recipe, and that is my version of sourdough bread. So I already came on here and shared how to make a sourdough starter and then all kinds of recipes that you can do for that starter. And I will link all those below. There is a playlist for sourdough videos. One thing that people keep asking me is, what about your sourdough bread recipe? The truth is I didn't really have a tried and true bread recipe. Often I like to just make the English muffins or the pancakes just because they're super simple. But I have been playing around for the last probably 6 months with a recipe. I have, added honey, taken honey out, added coconut oil, tweaked the amounts. I finally feel like I have a recipe that I really love and that consistently produces some good loaves of sourdough bread. A few notes to consider. Sourdough bread, at least in my experience and everything I've tried, is not gonna get hugely fluffy like store-bought bread, especially if you're gonna use whole grain flour. So I like to use my mill. I have a Nutri-Mill. I'll link the one that I have below to grind my own grains. And I've had a lot of questions about where I get those. I actually order them from a co-op. It's called Country Life Natural Foods. And basically you just need to get an order together for, I think it's $500. Somebody in my area puts it together for us and we all just pool our order together because it's free shipping that way. So if you can get together some people like that in your area, that's awesome. Sometimes I go out to the Amish to get grains, but either way, I like to use freshly milled wheat berries that I put through my Nutri-Mill. So that is not gonna produce the most fluffy loaf of bread. It is a bread that you can slice, you can use it for sandwiches, you can use it for French toast, which we love, but don't expect it to be exactly like regular bread. So I'm gonna show you now how to make it. I start with my Bosch mixer. You do not have to have this, it is not a requirement. I like it because it has the dough hook. It will knead the bread for you. They also have the same exact attachment for the KitchenAid mixer, or you can of course knead it by hand. So I add to that mixer 1 cup of fed sourdough starter. So this just means you take your starter out of the refrigerator, give it some flour and water. Don't worry too much about the measurements. After your starter is good and established, you just can basically, I just throw in some water and flour till it's the consistency I like, which is just a little thicker than pancake batter. Let it sit out for about 8 hours. That is now fed sourdough starter. So 1 cup of sourdough starter, 1.5 cups of filtered water. I use my Berkey. I made a video about my Berkey and I'll link the video and where I got my Berkey below. 1 tablespoon salt, 1/2 cup melted coconut oil, 1/2 cup honey, and then 6 to 7 cups of flour. Now this is the part where you don't just want to add all the flour right into the recipe. Add it one by one, knead it slowly, and let it get to just the point where it's pulling away from the sides of the mixer, and not super sticky, but not overly floury because that's gonna make a really dense loaf. Basically, you wanna get away with as little flour as you can, but still able to work it and make it stretchy. So then if you are using a mixer, turn it on high for about 10 minutes. Now I know that that's a really long time, but my goal in kneading my dough is to get it to where it's so stretchy that if you pull it apart with your fingers, you can get a thing that's so thin you can see the light through it. So if you can stretch it that far, then it's nice and stretchy, the gluten is nicely developed, and it's gonna rise properly. Now if it just pulls apart, it doesn't stretch at all, then you need to keep working it. Now you don't wanna overwork the gluten either, that's also important. So make sure to kind of check it along the way and see how it's stretching. When you get to that point where you can pull it apart and see through it, it's so thin that you can make it almost like a balloon or something, I don't know, where you can stretch a balloon and see through it. Once you get to that point, that's when it's perfect. Now, if you're kneading with your hands, it might take a little bit longer to actually get to that point because it's not going so fast, but if you're an experienced kneader, you can definitely do that and you can try and work with it. Fair warning, it might not be perfect the first time you make this. All right, after you have it nice and stretchy and the gluten is good and developed, put it in a greased glass bowl with a towel over it and let it ferment for 24 hours. After 24 hours, it should have at least doubled. around the outsides of the bowl, you're gonna see the bubbles that kind of developed and formed. That will definitely show you that your sourdough starter is a nice, healthy, active starter, which if you've been keeping it for some time, it should be. Mine's over 7 years old, and so it is a mature starter and it always performs great for me. Divide it into 2 even balls. This will make 2 loaves, and put it in some stainless steel bread pans. Now I like to use stainless steel for health reasons. I don't like to use anything that's aluminum or non-stick or anything like that. Stainless steel is my favorite. I will link below the kind that I have, but I divide those in half, coat the bottom of those stainless steel pans with oil, put the bread dough in, and then I also like to coat the top with oil just so it doesn't get super dry. And then just put it in a nice warm spot and allow it to double. Now this part will vary depending on the season, how warm it is in your house, and maybe the humidity level. Now the longer it takes to double, the more sour flavor it will get. It's still really delicious, but you can definitely taste it. It's a different kind of taste that you might be used to if you're used to store-bought bread. In the summer, I will actually cover mine and then put it outside. That way it'll double more quickly, so it won't get as sour, because we already took care of most of the bad parts of the grain. Those were already fermented out in that first 24-hour rise. And so for the second part, I kind of like it to rise as quickly as possible. You can also, if it's winter and it's just there's nowhere warm anywhere, you can turn your oven on as low as it'll go and then turn it off so that it stays at about 100 degrees is about perfect, and let it rise in there. So I do that method a lot too. In the summer, just outside works great for me. Obviously make sure it's really covered or you're gonna have flies and ants and you don't want that. Once it's doubled, which this can take anywhere from 3 or 4 hours up to 12 hours depending on how warm it is. I usually let mine go basically all day. So I'll start the dough one morning. By the next morning, I'll put it in the pans. And then by that evening, I'm able to bake it, is typically how I structure this. Preheat the oven to 400 degrees and then put the loaves in for about 35 minutes. Kind of do 30 to 40 and check it, but 35 works great for me. You're looking for golden on the outside, but then of course the dough cooked all the way through. Once it comes out, let it sit for just a minute. Don't try to remove it right away or your bread might fall apart. Once it's cooled, 20, 30 minutes, you can remove it, slice into it. And if it's a time for a snack or dinner, oh, fresh sourdough bread hot out of the oven with some butter and raw honey is so good. Slather it with some grass-fed butter. It'll just taste delicious. I will let it keep for a week or 2. If you want longer storage, you can put it in the refrigerator. I often do that. Some of my favorite wheat choices. So if you're gonna go buy whole grain wheat, you'll notice that there is white, there is red, there is hard, there is soft. For bread, you want hard wheat. You do not want soft. Soft is more suited for baking muffins and things that don't need as high of a gluten content. Bread needs a high gluten content for it to stretch and rise. My favorite type of wheat is hard white. Red wheat tends to make things a little bit more dense. White wheat to me makes it a little fluffier. So I like hard white. Spring wheat is my preference. I get it from Prairie Gold from the co-op. So check that out if you can find it. I also like to sometimes use ancient einkorn. Over the years, we have altered wheat. It used to be amber waves of grain. You know, you've heard that in the song. Well, nowadays it is short. It has been altered for growing purposes so that it can be grown more easily and not as susceptible to breaking, and they've eliminated all the problems with growing the wheat, but a lot of times our bodies have a hard time recognizing it because it's not how we were intended to take in wheat. It's different now. So if you are very sensitive to gluten and to wheat, now I'm not a doctor, so obviously check with your doctor. You might find that if you use ancient einkorn and you ferment it 24 hours with sourdough, that you can tolerate it. I've heard lots of stories of people that are able to, so this is something to consider. I get mine off Thrive Market because it's a lot cheaper. I have a membership. There's just a few things on there that I find even cheaper on there than Amazon. And einkorn is one of them, gelatin's another. But if you want to try this, I would recommend it. I feed my sourdough starter this sometimes. Sometimes I feed it my freshly ground hard white spring wheat. It doesn't seem to mind at all that I switch back and forth because they're both wheat. I'll leave a link below for where I get this einkorn. I find that it's a really good option, especially if you have an intolerance. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you are able to make some delicious loaves of sourdough bread and feed them to your family as a healthy sandwich bread, or just for morning toast or French toast, or as a side dish for a meal. It tastes delicious, slathered in butter. We really enjoy it in our family, especially since I feel like I've gotten this recipe down. Well, thank you so much for watching. If you're new, please hit that subscribe button. I make 2 new videos every week on food from scratch, natural living, and a handmade home. Thank you so much for stopping by the farmhouse.